What if the US Navy fought the Chinese Navy? Ground troops and allied nations are off the table. This is purely a fight between the two fleets. The one exception is China's land-based anti-ship missiles. Those are physically built into how their Navy fights, so they're in. Everything else stays naval. Location matters here than in almost any other matchup, so we're setting this in the South China Sea, the most likely real-world starting point, right in China's backyard, where the two fleets already cross paths regularly. Now, let's look at what both sides actually bring to the fight. The US Navy. The US Navy has around 293 Battle Force ships, built around 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Each carrier goes to sea inside a strike group, typically a cruiser or two, several destroyers, at least one attack submarine, and logistics ships. One strike group alone carries roughly 7,500 people and puts around 70 aircraft in the air. Each destroyer has 96 launch cells that can fire everything from Tomahawk cruise missiles to air defense interceptors. A cruiser adds another 122 on top of that. Across the whole fleet, the US has roughly 10,000 of these launch cells total. That number matters because each cell is a missile ready to go at a moment's notice, shooting down incoming aircraft, hitting a ship over the horizon, or striking a target 1,000 miles away on land. It's the closest thing to a direct firepower count that exists, and no Navy on Earth comes close. Then there's the submarine force. The US operates around 50 attack submarines, a mix of Virginia-class and aging Los Angeles-class boats, every one of them nuclear-powered. They're quieter, long-ranged, and more capable than anything China has underwater. And that's the consistent conclusion of every serious defense study that's looked at both fleets. The US also has decades of real operational experience behind it. Continuous combat operations since the early 1990s. Missile strikes, carrier operations, anti-submarine patrols, the full range. That experience lives in the crews and the tactics. Worth being honest though, a lot of it was built fighting much weaker opponents. And the Navy itself has acknowledged in recent years that the high-end warfighting skills you actually need against a peer fleet have gotten somewhat rusty during decades of counterterrorism focus. The Chinese fleet. China has over 370 Battle Force vessels by the latest Pentagon count, more than the US by a significant margin. But the raw number is misleading. A large chunk of it is small corvettes and coastal patrol boats that wouldn't survive long in a serious open ocean fight. The ships that actually matter are around 35 Type O-52D destroyers, 10 Type O-55 cruiser-class destroyers, and a submarine force of roughly 48 diesel-electric boats and 6 nuclear attack submarines. The Type O-55 is worth a closer look. It carries 112 launch cells, more than any US destroyer, though slightly fewer than the aging Ticonderoga cruisers the US is currently phasing out. The US Navy still classifies it as a cruiser because of its size and overall capability. What those ships now carry makes them even more significant. The YJ-21 is a hypersonic anti-ship missile confirmed operational on the Type O-55, traveling at Mach 6 in flight and hitting Mach 10 on its final approach, with a warhead that actively maneuvers to make interception harder. Until very recently, the US had nothing ship-launched to match that speed, though the Navy is now converting its Zumwalt-class destroyers to carry the conventional prompt-to-strike hypersonic missile, with the first ship completing sea trials in January 2026. It's a capability that exists on one ship right now, with 2 more in the pipeline. China has been fielding the YJ-21 across a class of 10 cruiser-sized warships. That gap is closing, but it isn't closed yet. China also now has 3 aircraft carriers, the older Liaoning and Shandong, which use a ski jump launch ramp, and the Fujian, commissioned in November 2025, which uses an electromagnetic catapult system and can operate a wider range of aircraft, including 5th-generation J-35 stealth fighters. Less proven than US carriers in every meaningful way, but they give China a real open ocean strike capability it didn't have a decade ago. On submarines, China's nuclear attack boats are still louder and easier to track than American ones. That gap is documented and real. Its diesel-electric submarines are a different story in the right environment, though. In the shallow, complicated waters of the South China Sea, they run extremely quiet for long stretches without surfacing, and they know those waters far better than any American crew does. The closer the fight stays to China's coastline, the more dangerous they become. Where China is clearly behind is people. The PLAN has essentially no combat experience. Its sailors have trained hard, run big exercises, sailed in increasingly complex formations, but they've never fired weapons at a real enemy, never kept a damaged ship in the fight, never dealt with the actual chaos of combat at sea. That gap is real, even if nobody can put a precise number on it. The strategy gap. The two fleets aren't just different in hardware. They're built around completely different ideas of how a war at sea is supposed to go. The US Navy is built to show up anywhere on Earth and dominate. Its whole structure is built around the carrier strike group as a self-contained offensive force that doesn't need anyone's permission or local infrastructure to operate. China has spent 30 years building a system specifically designed to stop that from working near its coastline. Layered missiles, submarines, radar networks, and weapons placed on fortified islands, all of it engineered to make it too expensive for US carriers to get close. The South China Sea sits mostly inside that danger zone. The US has been adapting. Its answer is called distributed maritime operations, spreading the fleet out rather than clustering it around carriers, making it harder for China to target everything with one big missile salvo. Smart concept, but it's still being developed and refined rather than proven in a real fight. That's the core tension. The US has a more capable fleet overall. China has spent decades specifically building ways to make that matter less in this part of the world. How it most likely ends. There's no clean single answer, and anyone who tells you there is hasn't been paying attention. Here are the three most realistic outcomes. And to be clear, these assume a naval conflict only. No allied nations, no other military branches on either side. The most likely scenario at around 50% is a costly stalemate. Both fleets take serious losses in the first week. US submarines probably account for significant damage to China's surface fleet. China's missiles land hits on US ships, possibly including a carrier. Neither side gets what it came for. Pressure builds on both governments, and it ends through negotiation rather than one fleet destroying the other. Nobody wins cleanly. Nobody loses cleanly either. The second scenario, at around 30%, is a narrow US win. American submarines degrade China's surface fleet enough early on that China can't sustain coordinated operations. US carrier aircraft, flying at the outer edge of China's missile range, gradually chip away at island-based defenses. It takes weeks, costs far more than anyone wanted, and looks nothing like a clean victory. But the US ends up controlling enough of the South China Sea to call it one. The third scenario, at around 20%, goes China's way. Its missile systems perform in combat the way they've performed in tests. Land hits on US carriers early and force American strike groups to pull back out of effective range. China locks down the South China Sea before the US can regroup. This requires China's largely untested targeting systems to work as advertised against a fleet that's actively jamming, maneuvering, and firing back. A big assumption, but not an impossible one. What all three scenarios share is this. It would be the most expensive naval conflict since World War II for whoever fights it. If you want to understand how a conflict like this might actually start, our World War III early warning video is on the screen now. Thanks for watching.